So last month, Apple acquired a photo editing app, a Photoshop competitor called Pixelmator, and they have a handful of apps. The main one is their Mac app, that's called Pixelmator Pro. They also have two iPad apps. One of them is a scaled down version called just plain Pixelmator, and they have another iPad app called Photomator, which is built specifically for photo editing, color corrections, and that sort of thing. This is an interesting move because it comes a few months after Canva acquired Affinity software suite, which includes Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Publisher. Canva is really making a play to be a direct competitor to Adobe. And I've never really thought of Apple as a direct Adobe competitor, but Apple does have several creative apps now. Apps like Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro compete directly with things that you'll find in Adobe's Creative Suite. But Apple really hasn't done a lot in terms of like the professional layer of photography and illustration and graphic design and that sort of thing. They've done a ton on the iPhone in terms of just adding features to their own photo taking apps and that sort of thing. But this is a really interesting play, and it really does make Apple a direct competitor to Adobe in a way it wasn't before. So I haven't talked about Pixelmator much on this channel. In fact, I don't think I've ever done a dedicated video for what Pixelmator does. I've had Pixelmator, I actually had to go back and look, since 2011. That's when I first purchased it on the Mac, and back then it was almost a pixel for pixel copy of Adobe Photoshop. It has changed a lot since then. The main reason I haven't covered it is the iPad app is more stripped down and it doesn't do as much, especially for illustration. Using Pixelmator Pro on a Mac desktop does do a lot more, but it has changed a lot. And I thought it'd probably be a good idea to just jump in and let's demo it and you can take a look at it yourself. It's not cheap. There is a 7-day trial, but it does cost $50 if you want to purchase it after that. It's also worth noting that is a one-time purchase. So anyway, let's go and check it out. All right, so what we're looking at here is Pixelmator Pro. And the first thing that I noticed when I started using this is how different it looks from what I was using several years ago. So I have to confess, I have never used Canva. It's a graphic design software. I like doing it the old-fashioned way. I don't like working from templates. I like working from scratch. This feels Canva-esque to me as someone who's never used Canva. This is what I imagine Canva is probably like, where it's giving you a ton of templates and there's so many designs in here that you can kind of choose from as your starter template. So if I wanted to just use one of these, let's load it up and see what we get. And over here on this side, we have all of our layers, and so it shows our type and how everything is kind of separated. The photos have like this little plus thing, so I can replace this from my photos. Let's bring in a photo of my dog here to use instead of this guy. Can I scale this? Yeah, and I could scale my dog photo. I could probably move it around to get more of his face. And over here on the right side, we have a bunch of tools. So right now, this is kind of my arrow tool, which has like my arrangement. Oh, we have some tool tips as well. You know, just some of the things that you would use to modify here. Over here, we have our paintbrush, which is allow us to do color fills and that sort of thing. So this really does seem more geared for design than anything else. I think as we go through these, we're going to see a lot of photo editing things, which makes a lot of sense to have in some design software and that sort of thing. There are brushes though, like a lot of design software. So let's create an empty canvas and let's see what we can do in terms of art and illustration. Because Photoshop obviously started as a photo editing app, but now it is used for so much, including used a lot in professional illustration settings. So I'm going to go new. I'm going to go ahead and grab a default canvas. I'm going to go ahead and tap on create. And here we just have our empty canvas. I'm going to just go ahead and create a new layer that I'm going to be drawing on. I still have my pens pulled up over here, and there's two options. There's paint and then there's pixel paint. I'm not sure what pixel paint does. Oh, okay, so it's like a pixel brush. That's kind of cool. So you could use this for pixel art. I'm going to undo that though, and I'm going to go back to paint, and I'm just going to show you guys some of the brushes that are available here. So my 2 cents in using this for a little bit before I started recording here is that it's not really designed for art. It does have some of the features you would expect an art app to have, but it's not like its core competency. So over here we have like basic brushes, so you could choose like your normal hard brown brushes, your kind of softer edge brushes. You have pencil brushes, which are delineated by your normal hardness, you know, HBB type pencils. You have your crayons, so you have like kohl, chalk, crayon, pastels, and that sort of thing. You have pens, which is kind of interesting because I'm always looking at the pens with these sort of apps. But here we have gel pens and ballpoint pens and that sort of thing. It doesn't have like the ink quill pens that I'm personally looking for and that I use. There is a section called inks, and I thought, oh, well, this is probably going to be better. But these tend to be more calligraphy brushes. I was going to try to say calligraphic, but I don't think that's a word. Calligraphy brushes, we'll go with that. There's this manga brush. I was kind of excited to use that, but when I got in here, I was like, oh, this is just another like calligraphy brush. This isn't what I'm looking for at all. So I'm going to go in here. There's like a Chinese brush, which kind of has an edge to it a little bit. It's kind of like a less ink on the brush sort of brush. Japanese brush might get closer to what I'm looking for in terms of kind of that variable. That's the closest thing that I think that is in here. And then over here we have all our settings. So I can go in here and I can change my brush size. And you could see that when you actually get bigger on that Japanese brush, you could see some of like, it's actually trying to mimic what a brush would look like as opposed to a pen. You have those like little bristle marks on the edge. You can change the opacity. The opacity on this is set to like 94%. You probably can't pick that up on the camera, but there's a little bit of lightness to it. And the lighter you go, the less you get. So there is some pressure sensitivity happening on the opacity as well. And there are some other features to every brush. So you have like size by pressure, opacity by pressure, angle, tilt, scale horizontally, that sort of thing. I have been using a different brush. Let me find, it's probably still in my favorites. Hard Basic. That's what I'm going with. I'm basic. Let me go ahead and create a new layer here to work with. And this is the kind of ink brush that I'm looking for, where as I apply more pressure, I get a thicker line, less pressure, I get a thinner line. Let me increase the brush size so it's easier to see what happens when I apply more pressure. And that brush looks pretty good. It does what I need it to do. So I could come in here with my pencils and I could do, you know, all of my sketching and my roughing out of what I'm looking to do. And then I could come in with my ink brush and I can do more with it. So that's pretty cool. I'm gonna go ahead and create another layer and jump back to my ink brush. Something that I have noticed that I think would drive me nuts if I was using this program quite a bit is that I could come in here with my ink brush and I could draw with it, and then maybe I want to come in and I want to change my brush size and go with something a little thinner to do some of the other lines. Probably a little too thin. There we go. So I'm going to do some of these thinner lines in there like that. Sketch layer. And then there's this little update button here. And if I don't press that and I jump to another brush, it loses all of my settings. So any setting that I have made to that brush are lost. Those are things like size setting. If you set smoothing, a lot of these brushes have smoothing. You could toggle that on and off. You could also set the smoothing to different things. If you set smoothing to something and you leave that brush without hitting update, it's going to lose all of that information. So there is that update button. So as I come in here and let's come up and let me change the brush size a little bit. Update comes up, I can tap update, and now my brush has changed. And when I do, change about and go back to my other brush, and then come back to that pencil, it's going to remember that now. My overall feeling is that since I kind of had to hack the brushes to make them work the way that I wanted them to work, they're not really set up for art. They're not set up the way I want to use them, and they don't quite feel right to me. There's just something that's just a little bit off about the brushes, and that's probably because they haven't played with them. They haven't nuanced them. They haven't really refined them the way that a lot of the painting and drawing apps that I'm used to using usually do. So they're here. There's a lot going on, but it's missing that je ne sais quoi, right? That Clip Studio Paint might have, or that some of Photoshop's hardcore brushes might have. And that's part of the reason why I've never really talked about this from an art standpoint. All right, so let me grab my iPad here, and I'm just going to try to balance it on my drawing tablet as we go. And this is Pixelmator for the iPad, and this is like a scaled down version of Pixelmator Pro that we were just using. So you have some templates down here, but the templates aren't nearly as like varied or as exciting in terms of like the graphic design aspect from Pixelmator, the desktop Pixelmator Pro, I should say. But you have some basics. These almost look like comic panel type things. I'm gonna go ahead and hit cancel. Gonna hit plus, and this is just gonna let me go in and use like paper sizes and that sort of thing. Last use is just my screen size, so that's what we're gonna go with. There's a little tray here that you can open up so you can see your layers, and I can hit plus, and I can add things. So I can add photo, text, shape. I can add something from my camera. I'm gonna go ahead and just create a new layer. I'm gonna make it a transparent layer because that's what I'm gonna be drawing on. And then we have this little brush tool, so we can bring that up. And this isn't just brushes, but this is a lot of like the design things that you might be looking for. So if you want to do a color fill or adjust colors or that sort of thing, that's in that brush section too. So I'm gonna go to paint and erase. And I just have, my brush open. And as you can see, what's happening here is this isn't pressure sensitive, this particular brush I'm using. It's actually speed sensitive. So as I go faster, that line actually gets thinner, which is kind of interesting. Let's go to the brushes and see what we have. We have the same categories as the desktop app. And some of these brushes are identical. For example, many of these pencil brushes are actually the same brushes. Let me change the size there so you can see it. It's too much. Are the same size, or same type of brushes we saw on the desktop. But again, a lot of the nuances in the brush engine that you're used to in other iPad drawing apps, Android drawing apps, just aren't here. For example, the size, right? In most painting apps, if I want to make it bigger and I tap on the size, I just tap on where I want it on the slide bar and it just moves the little thing there. Here you have to actually tap and drag. Also, this thing gets huge. It goes up to 1,000 pixels. Very rarely is your canvas that size. So for most of the time, like if I'm working with a pencil brush, I probably want it between 4 and 12 pixels, right? But the range for 4 and 12 pixels is like literally 4 to 12 pixels on the slider. So it makes it very hard to get that super nuanced thing that you get in a lot of painting apps in terms of size and adjustments. So there's just a lot of little things like that. The other thing is I'm looking for an ink brush. And so my inks here are the same ones that I had before. The Japanese brush is probably the closest I'm going to find. There is the pen. So let's grab a gel pen, and this is just this is a gel pen, and if I want to change the size I can make it a little bigger. But what's weird about it is when you make the gel pen bigger, you can see it's got this faded edge. So oftentimes with a lot of these brushes, it's not a hard round feeling. It's hard to find that as the brushes get bigger, which it lets you make them very big. They just get kind of fuzzy. So just a lot of little things, and there's no way, at least I've been searching and I can't find it. Maybe there is a way to tap into these brushes and adjust the settings the way you can on the desktop. I don't believe you can. So I can't go in there and I can't adjust the pressure sensitivity. I can't adjust the curves. I can't adjust those things. I can't add smoothing. So it's missing some of those things. So that's part of the reason why I've never really talked about Pixelmator on this channel for the iPad, is it just doesn't have the features that you'd expect in a lot of drawing apps. I don't think that's what it's for. I don't think that's what they're designing it for. I think it's really built for graphic design, not illustration, even though if you really wanted to in a pinch, you could use it that way. So that is Pixelmator. Those are my thoughts. I think this is a really interesting acquisition on Apple's part. I'm really curious to see what they do with this. Right now, Pixelmator Pro on the desktop is $50. This is not a cheap app. I wouldn't be surprised if they still continue to push this down the desktop publishing angle. Pixelmator says that right now there are no changes to the roadmap or anything like that. They're going to continue making their app. They just happen to be owned by Apple. Apple's been pushing hard into AI in the last year or two, and so I would not be surprised to see if these apps pushing hard into AI as well. So if you are not a fan of AI, you probably aren't going to be a fan of many of the things that they roll out here. Time will tell. We will see. But what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.